name is David Richards, and I live in Charlotte, Michigan. I was in the Coast Guard for 4 years.
So 1960, you're 17 years old. You go down and go in the Coast Guard. Well, why the Coast? Why not some other branch that goes on the water?
Well, back when I graduated from high school, they had the draft was in the process, and I felt that I wanted to study up on the branches and pick the one I want and join before I got drafted. Liking boats, I narrowed it down quickly down to the Navy and the Coast Guard, but the Coast Guard, with such a history of not only law enforcement, safety on the waters, they did so many other things, and they were smaller. But that time the Coast Guard was only 30,000 people. The Detroit PD was bigger than the Coast Guard. And it was harder to get in. Like when I passed my tests to get in, then they told me I needed 3 letters of reference from people back home. They had me take my physical from my family doctor because he should know more about me, and graduated in June and was in basic at Cape May, New Jersey in August. When I came in the Coast Guard, it was 17. My mom had to sign for me to come in. That would have been 1960. There was a better chance to make rank, maybe possibly. Smaller ships, a smaller outfit, maybe could do a little better and not a number. And so that's why I did it. I'm glad I did. Well, when I went signed up for the Coast Guard, and they gave me a date and to come to Cape May, New Jersey, and we met in the 6th. There was 6 of us from Michigan going to the Coast Guard at that time, and they swore us in there in Detroit, put us on a plane to Philadelphia. And then when we got off the plane in Philadelphia, there was a bus there waiting to take us to the receiving station, United States Coast Guard, Cape May, New Jersey. Basic training was 12 weeks. And toward the end, they gave us they wanted 3 different districts that we would prefer to go to. And my preferred district was the 9th Coast Guard District, which took in the Great Lakes, because I was hoping to be back to where occasionally I could get home more often and my folks could come visit me. And so I was fortunate and got sent to Cleveland along with 5 other buddies of mine. And the other 5 got Group Detroit. I got Group Chicago, and right off I thought, I'm going to end up in Wisconsin or Minnesota or something. This isn't going to be like I was hoping. But hey, you're signed up and you do what you're told. So they put me on a train overnight to Chicago. The next day I reported into the 9th Coast Guard District on Canal Street in Chicago. And very friendly. You're out of boot camp now and it's a lot more friendlier. And he said, "You like Michigan?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Where are you from?" And I told him. He looks down at his paperwork and he says, "I've got 2 openings. One's in St. Joe and one's in South Haven." He said, "I would recommend for you South Haven. I like South Haven best, and it seems to fit you so much." So they put me on a bus, and I came to South Haven. I of course, had my sea bag and had my uniform. At that time, the Coast Guard uniform was basically a Navy uniform. Okay. But the Coast Guard had a shield on the sleeve. And so I got off the bus in South Haven. I was in the bus station, and I asked the guy there where the Coast Guard station was. And he said, "Step out the front door and go left, and roughly about half a mile down, and you'll see the station." So I started to go, and a gentleman said, "Sailor," he says, "I'll give you a ride down there." And he told me he was a pastor from a local church. And we pull up, and all I see, because it's dark, you can't see the lake and all that, I see a 2-story house. You know, that's what I see. Not gated, no security, nothing. And okay, what do I do? Well, I guess I'd go up and knock on the door, and I knocked on the door and nobody answered. Well, I could hear them watching television in the building, so I walk in, happened to be through the galley, kitchen, went through the dining room, down the hall, looked in, and there's 4 or 5 guys watching television. And they, I guess, were expecting me because they said, "Are you the new guy?" And I guess so. And there was my new family, and it just they explained things to me and just simply got me started. And because it was just before Thanksgiving and a holiday, it was pretty much just general. This is going to be your bed and here's your locker. They weren't doing anything as far as work. I came in just before Thanksgiving in 1960, and I got out on the 17th in 1964.
So let's take a look at your life there at that station. You're 17, you're just starting out in it, and you're at this station. What was a day like at that point in your early years when you first started?
Well, in the early years, well, basically, you had breakfast at 8 in the morning, and at 9 you went and did whatever drills you were going to do that day. And they usually for an hour, for example, like first aid, different things like that. That would deal with what we were doing, handling the boat and so forth. And then, depending on whether you were a seaman or an engineman, a deck person or mechanic in below decks, for example, a mechanic or an engineman at our Coast Guard station, you've worked on everything from the pickup truck to the lawnmower to the boats, everything that needed fixing. Can you put this fan up? That's what you did, because if we were full commitment, there was 12 of us, and so that was an average day. Then you got into being on watch, and that was a rotation of pretty much, because during a normal day, the first class bosun mate was sitting at the desk with the radio, and so you didn't have anybody on watch at that particular thing. But watch started at 1600 or 4 p.m. and they ran one every 4 hours, 4 to 8, 8 to midnight, midnight to 4, and 4 to 8. And you rotated with 3 guys doing that. Then you're back up at 9 and you're starting a new day. Now, depending on the number of people there, because if you were married and had a wife, you could have an apartment or at home. Sure. So if you weren't on duty that night, you could go home. So basically, it was an 8 to 5 job, and there on a normal day without emergencies. Well, number one, you're sitting at the main desk at the front, and you're listening to the ship-to-shore radio. That was your main thing. And then they had another radio that picked up like the yacht traffic in addition to the ship-to-shore. You answered the phone. You were kind of like for fire watch when people were sleeping. Okay. And if people came in the door, you asked them if you could help them. Okay. And that was pretty much what you did. But like coming in November, our boat was out of the water to winter. Okay. And so we couldn't go anywhere. We just were there to try to get help for whatever was happening. And at that time, mostly the only traffic was the fishing fleet, fish tugs, of which the LCJ is still here. And they had to go out every day. Yeah. So they either had to break themselves out through the ice, or we had a Coast Guard cutter to come in and break open the channel for them to go out. They would come from Chicago, or at that time Grand Haven had one. The Mesquite, it was in here one time. And I remember that because later on the Mesquite sunk up north. So, but there was a tugboat called the Arundel out of Chicago that broke ice. Okay. It didn't have to be a real big one to break our channel open, just enough to get the fishermen out.
You're on a watch during a normal summertime out there, and it's a no wake zone. Have any trouble with boats coming down there that are going faster than they're supposed to?
But in the daytime, a lot of times you'd have to step out and tell them to slow it down. And had it where we would, if we could see the name of the boat, we would log it in and out in case a boat came up missing and they called and said, is that boat in your harbor? You would know, or have a pretty good idea if you did.
Sure.
They even had an observation tower out on the beach where through the summertime, you were up in that tower, you could get the names of the boats and kind of keep track, and then you also kept track of the fishing fleet. Did they come back in?
Okay.
You know, at the normal time, and so just a kind of a routine of trying to help out there that way.
Let's talk about the tools you had to work with, and I'm talking about tools of Coast Guard, boats and other. What kind of boats did you have at the South Haven station?
The basic boat was a 36-foot motor lifeboat,
Which is similar to what we have.
which is similar to this one here beside me, and also similar to the 460 that's out giving rides on the river. And that was the basic boat for all Coast Guard stations.
Okay.
As we went through the years, the boats got better. Originally, when the Coast Guard, before they joined the life-saving service, they'd go out in a 26, 25-foot rowboat.
Yeah.
And were rowed out, and then later on graduated to the sail on it, you know, and got more modern. And in 39, 40, and 41, they built a bunch of these 36-foot. And the nice thing about this boat, this 36-footer, was self-righting, with the compartments that held air, would keep you afloat, and if you rolled over, the 2,000-pound brass keel would bring you back up. So if you rolled that thing, just hang on and you'll come back up. I only ever once had one occasion where I thought I was going to roll it coming into the mouth. That's looks wide when it's daytime, but you're coming in dark and you say have a 8-foot sea. You're hard, but and it went up on its side. It was a northwest, and it flicked me up, and I figured if it digs, we're going. But it caught and righted itself. That keel brought us back down. So, but that was the basic boat. Everybody had one of those. Now, if you were a busier station, say for example like St. Joe, they had a 40-footer that was mainly a light weather, but it was fast, and ours was slow.
Yeah.
It was slow, about 8 knots, or roughly 8 miles an hour. Okay. Well, I like to today had talked to some young students.
Yeah.
And I broke it down. This boat here, being the main boat, I looked at it as 5 different things that boat did.
Okay.
Number 1, that boat was a wrecker. You go out and pull in people that's broke down, run out of gas, all kinds of things. Number 2, it could be a fire truck. We had a pump that we could throw, a portable pump, throw on our 36-footer. We pump 60 gallons a minute. And right across from the museum here, they had a warehouse, like they still do, full of boats. Well, it caught fire one night and burned. And so the local fire department was on land, and we were sucking water out of the river and fighting it from the other side. So here again, the 36-footer's now a fire truck. Then an ambulance. One time, a freighter going by several miles out, somebody fell and got hurt real bad. So we went out with our wire, forget what they call it, the stretcher-like thing, and pulled up alongside. And those things are pretty high. Oh, yeah. Pretty high, and it was rough, and I didn't want to bang that thing. And I happened to be at the helm, so you're being careful. And they lowered down a rope, and we hooked our stretcher to it, and they pulled it up, and then they tied him in it and lowered us down. And then the ambulance was waiting for him at the end of the pier. So we'd been an ambulance. Search and rescue. A lot of times people coming from Chicago, they've only got so much gas, and if they didn't stay on the right heading, or they'd run out of gas, or they'd throw something accidentally up against their compass, which would ski out them, or just engine failures, people lost, motor quitting, different things that would get reported to us. And so that's why you became a wrecker. one of the ones I remember the most was the day we became a police boat. A man came in and he said, my boat was stolen yesterday. Lived up just north of town. And he could see his boat now out in the lake, and there's kids on it. Kids had stolen it. It was a smaller boat. And he asked if we could go out and rest the kids and get the boat. Well, we don't have rest powers. And so we called the state police. And a trooper came right down. Nice blue car, nice young man, beautiful uniform. And going out and coming back, we got the kids, got the boat. But going out, he and I talked. And he said, you know, when you get out of the Coast Guard, you ought to join the state police. Well, 2 years out, I wore that uniform for 26 years. So it was a police boat. So this made this boat all these different things. And because each place had a boat like that. Sure. Now, some of them had a 30-footer, 40-footer, more speed. But we were hoping we were in line to get a 44-footer when they came out, but we weren't busy enough. Sure. But when Chicago got their 44-footer, we got their diesel 36-footer, so that's how we got a diesel.
In 1960, I think you still have some freighters that were coming in here.
Yeah, we had a lot of Swedish freighters that brought in paper product for Kalamazoo. And there was a long warehouse at one time along the river there, and they would unload there. And sometimes we'd have 2 or 3 in a week. And because our boat was tied up on the river, every time one would come in and go, we moved our boat to give them plenty of room. And and then they would load the paper products to the train track came there and take it to Kalamazoo. And also right next to us was a power plant for the power for South Haven. And then those same tracks brought coal to the power plant.
And it wasn't the bridge we have out there right now. It was a swing. It was a bridge on a turntable.
Yes, I remember that boat because a lot of times it basically was one way. So if it turned, you had to let each other go. Right. I have one fond memory. When I left the Coast Guard here, I spent a little over a year with the police department. One young man was intoxicated and tried to cross the bridge at high rate of speed and didn't make it. And he was giving people trouble at the hospital, and so gave him his option to either behave or stay with us, and he stayed with us. So that's my big memory, but it used to back up a lot of traffic because once it turned, and it was narrow, I mean, you could, if you squeezed, you could get 2 vehicles. Yeah. But you'd let one side would go and then the other side would go. And it would back up a lot. So when they built that new bridge, that was such a blessing.
Were you at the helm of the boat when it came in the time that you almost rolled it, or?
Yes. Yes. How a typical boat crew here out of South Haven was 3 people. You had to be a petty officer to be in charge when you went out, either 3rd class and above. Okay. Had to be a petty officer. Then you also had to have an engineman or a fireman. Okay. So you had your mechanic with you. Then you could have like a bosun mate or a deckhand. Okay. Those 3. Yeah. Now, quite often when I first started going out, I was the fireman. You were there in case something happened with the engine, you could work on it. Okay. And had a petty officer. But later on, within 2 years, I was a 3rd class petty officer. Then I became the boat captain. Okay. And so, but I served as a petty officer and was the engineman. So then I could take like 2 seamen out with me, as long as you had all those bases covered. Okay. When you went out. Yeah. There used to be another range light further at the back, and you could line up the 2 red lights. So when they took that out there, you had a white light and a red light, and if you came at the wrong angle, you could run into the pier. So you had to kind of get your bearing and look uptown for lights and come in. And if it was rough, and quite often out of the northwest.
There are other ways that Coast Guard, maybe you didn't do it here, but other ways they had to transfer, like I think they call it the beaches buoy, where they would transfer from one boat to another.
Beaches buoy was mostly set up on a beach. Okay. And you fired and back in, things were really busy, the ships are mostly all wooden. Yeah. Back in the days of the life-saving service and the original Coast Guard. and they would come ashore and get hung up and start breaking up. So then the Coast Guard would either row their boat out to help them, or some boats were on trailers and they had equipment and drag that boat, and then they'd set up and shoot the breeches buoy out and then unload the people from the ship with the breeches buoy. We practiced, we had a gun that looked like a rifle that had a very small projectile that carried out real small line. You could shoot that over a boat, and then you tied bigger line to it, and they pulled it to that boat. We just only ever did it in drill. But that one guy, we always let him do it because he was a hunter and he knew how to handle it, because that had one heck of a kick. One heck of a kick. We thought, well, okay, we're just going to brace it up against the building here, the foundation, and save his shoulder, just to see. Shredded that stock, just smashed it all that. So we don't do that no more.
And then, you weren't here at the time, but then that building, that Coast Guard building there, was destroyed.
Yeah, I watching the news and saw that it burned, and oh my gosh, because I'd lived there for 4 years. So I had to go see it. And so climbed in the car and came down and got pictures, and could see where I used to sleep, and it was sad to see that it was gone. Well, the Coast Guard itself had it became a full-fledged Coast Guard station in, I think it was 73, and so they demilitarized it. And then it was turned over to the Coast Guard Auxiliary, and they had it at the time that it burned. And so then the property went back to the city, and now there's a place where you can buy sandwiches, T-shirts, and they just put a new water thing right in the front of where the Coast Guard station used to be.
So let's go to something that's always been said, always heard, and it really is a big issue. It's the motto of the Coast Guard. What is the motto?
Always prepared. But the old guys, like myself, we always, you got to go out, but you don't have to come back. Well, I never liked that. I never liked that at all. That's not encouraging. But I could see why that's just what they said. I made up my mind, if the boat can get me out there and I run the boat right, I can get us back. And so you don't think about that. You're trained. When you're trained to do something, you just react and do it.
Well, that brings us to something that's very exciting here at the Michigan Maritime Museum, which is a boat that we call our movie star that was in the movie The Finest Hour. So tell me what you think it would have been like to sit in that boat and try to get out there. In 1952, my notes say it was February 18th in 1952 in Massachusetts. They go out, they decide to go out in this thing. How would you do that?
I was shocked at the one part where they said, you got to go out. And they told a couple guys they were going. They said, we ain't going. We ain't going. Man, you'd been court-martialed and shot if you ever said that. You don't say that, you go. Well, then Bernie, thank goodness, he's a good, cool guy, I think. But he knew the bar that was there. He knew how to handle it. Good friends with fishermen that taught him different things, I think. And so and then he picked his crew, and they went out, and you just got to go. Get across that bar, and they basically got lucky and found this tanker. And so just the feeling of the boat, this boat, this 30 has a special feel to it. It's like a cork, and you bounce. You'd think heavy, you bounce, and it throws you around a lot. And so here's this boat, and they're doing the rescue, and they get there, they find it, and his big thing was keeping the Coast Guard boat close to where they could lower them down, or they could jump, and then his 3 helpers were helping people get on. 2 things that came to mind. This was wintertime, and it was snowing. but there was no ice on the boat. You go out here in the wintertime, ice builds up quickly on this boat, and you have to be careful because it can get too hot and wait and roll you over. So you have to be careful if you're out there. You aren't out there too often because you're getting ice in here, and this goes in the barn. But there was no ice. And the bell that's on there, every time we'd go and fight through, it would ding, and just drove me nuts, you know. And so I was blessed to learn of Mr. Jeff Shook, who owns the boat, and put it back together, and through Facebook contacted him and said, I got some questions. And the first was why no ice? You couldn't have put all those people on. That thing had been covered with ice. They could have hung on.
How many people were in?
32. They saved plus the 4 on the boat.
How could they do that?
They just kept piling them on. There's pictures out here that they're hanging everywhere. But if it was covered with ice, you couldn't do it. Jeff says, well, Dave, we filmed that in September. So that's why there was no ice.
Okay.
And then I said, but in the real rescue, they loaded it up. Well, salt water doesn't freeze as fast as fresh water. And so the temperature, that's why it wasn't freezing, why there was no ice on the boat.
As a member of the Coast Guard, as you were, what did you think of how they did it in the movie?
I thought, well, I saw the movie and then I also read the book. And I wanted to see the movie to get the feel of what the Coast Guard was like then, if it was like us, the handling of the boat. And so just the way the boat handled, you could get that feeling. One of the first things that caught my mind is Bernie met this young lady. It was a telephone operator. And he met her and ended up marrying her. Well, my first wife, was a telephone operator here in South Haven. Back then, if you wanted to make a call, you called the telephone operator, and then she put your call through. Well, when you're on midnights and nothing is going on, nothing's going on for them either. Yeah. So we kind of met each other, and we'd talk a bit here and there. And so my first wife, we had that in common. Sure. But then in the book, or I've heard where she kind of helped get the light and go in. Yeah. She really wasn't part of that. She was in the hospital having a baby. Right. That's what I hear. So some things were a little different, but most of it just brought back floods of memories.
Yeah, especially, that's why I was curious, because you've been at the helm of a boat like that. That really says a lot about the 36er, doesn't it? I mean,
yeah. For its time, it was a wonderful boat. And see, this was back before we had GPS, or, this was back for radar, sonar, voice, where you could see where the voice was coming. All we had was a compass and a watch.
Yeah. There was just something I saw before coming over here about people getting upset on the beach because the red flags were up there and people were telling them it's too rough to go out. Now, most of us have heard about riptides and all that kind of thing, but tell me what all that means and why that's so difficult for people.
Well, people don't realize the power that are within the waves. We had riptides and stuff years ago, or back when I lived here and we'd go out, but you're kind of aware of it. You had the flags and you kind of honored the flags, And we didn't, every now and then somebody would get washed off a pier because they thought they should walk out on a wet pier and not realize the cement gets slippery and a wave hits you. Right. You're going off. Right. But as time has gone on, it's just seemed to have gotten worse. They don't, there's a lot of people that think you should have lifeguards. Well, those cost a lot of money. And the flags, if you honored the flags, they're really trying, and they try, but the public just will not cooperate. Because I can remember being when I was here, you'd see people out there, and we'd have to leave the building and walk out and get off the pier, covered with ice. Yeah. And as I read, and I see what the South Haven Police and the fire department, how well they've got it coordinated. They can have people here within a matter of just a couple minutes, and doing what they do. you know, they've got limited manpower, I imagine, just like anybody, but they get the job done.
Right.
But they're outnumbered by the public, you know, and I just get frustrated. Well, there's a lot of a lot of people that drive boats that shouldn't, just like there's people that drive cars and trucks that shouldn't, you know. And one of the things that we did here, and being a petty officer, was safety boarding, and we would had a place along the wall there and call boats of all sizes to make sure they had the equipment they needed, the paperwork and the equipment that they needed. And most people would cooperate with you, come right over, but then there was some others that they couldn't. They might have a brand new 25-footer, and they had the slightest idea how to bring it to the dock. Only at one time did we ever have a guy that gave me a finger, so to speak, and cat took off. He was in probably a 30-foot cruiser, and he took off laughing, because we didn't have anything to catch him, but we got his number, and his dock was in Chicago, and guess what happened? When he came and tied up at his dock, there was some U.S. Marshals there. They arrested him, confiscated his boat, and the fine was tremendous. We just had to chuckle here.
Now you talked about starting the engines in the morning, and you had a certain procedure you had to go through each day.
It was a period of time, I believe it was a half hour. We'd start them up, and it was tied to the dock, so you put them in gear so they're under load, making sure everything's right after checking the oil, checking the bilge, all the different things. And then you made sure it was running. Then you shut it back down and made sure you had fuel. It was topped off. And normally if you'd only run it for a couple hours, it wasn't down that much. So I mean, but that was just a morning routine, and it was usually done by the junior engineman or fireman. And I was I worked my way up to, by the time I left, I was a second class petty officer, and I didn't have to run the boat in the morning. Had other people to run it.
Any other stories that you think about that say, wait a second, this happened in South Haven that you were part of?
Oh, well, there was one night. People asked me what was the toughest thing I ever did. Well, when we had the gasoline 36-footer, you had to run the blower for a full minute before you dared crank it, because you had fumes that would build up. Now that's a long minute when you got somebody wanting you, but you do it because you don't want to blow up.
Right.
Well, when they built I-196 out here, they hauled a lot of sand and gravel in by ship, and they'd unload on the North Beach, and then that would be trucked out to the site. Well, it was actually an old ship that didn't have an engine anymore, had a tugboat, and it would bring in sand and gravel. And one night it was tremendously windy out of the northwest, which is quite common. And they were tied up there, and as they got unloaded, the boat kept rising up and up. Well, the wind caught it and broke all their lines, and that boat started coming right across the river to where ours sat.
Oh my goodness.
And so the guy on watch, I don't know if they told him, hey, you got to move your boat, or somebody hollered at him, or it would come on the radio, but he turned off the alarm. And I went running out there. I normally was one of the first out there, putting on my clothes, and I could see it. They didn't have to tell me. It was close. And so I jumped on the boat, and I said, well, if we blow, we blow, or if we go, we go. And I turned on the keys and hit the starter, and she boom, jumped right in, put her up full gas, put her in reverse, and skidded along the wall. And just if it had hit the boat, it would have been gone. Because we used to have a big bumper fender out there, and it just flattened that dude.
You could slide the boats would slide off of that boathouse into the water. Okay.
They had the tracks that went up, and they had a hoisting engine. It was a gasoline engine, and you could hook into the boat and lower the boat or pull it up. We had the 36-footer and we had a 26-footer. It was open. It was the open, but just like this one right behind you.
Okay. All right. Sounds great. Did you enjoy your time in the?
Yes, I did. I made a lot of friends. And you know, my family and I have camped here because they built the state park about the same time I was here.
Okay.
And so we were campers and went there. But now I had got to the point where everybody had died or moved. I didn't know anybody, and I was coming back. Well, then I got tied in with Ashley and Michigan Maritime Museum.
Sure.
Now I've got a new family.
Family. Tell me about your family.
Well, I've been married twice, and I'm single now. With the first wife, we had 2 sons, Dave and Jeff. Dave lives down in Greenwood, Indiana. Jeff lives in Houston, Texas.
Okay.
And then when I remarried, she already had children, so I got some stepchildren. But I still live in Charlotte. I have friends in Charlotte. My son keeps trying to talk me into coming to Indiana. I said, well, as long as I can take care of myself, I like Michigan.
Sure.
And he was born here in Michigan,
Okay.
and you know, in South Haven. So now he and his family come back here every couple of years. They rent a house over on the north side, and they'll come for a week or so. And so, and he just talks, and he's anxious to see the new museum and come and see it. So.
Do you have grandchildren?
Yep, I have got. Let's see, let's start with. I got 4 great-grandchildren. Okay, and then I've got 3, 4, 5 grandchildren.
Okay, so the Coast Guard was 4 years for you. What was your other career?
After I left the Coast Guard, I was interested in the state police.
Okay.
And so I took the exam for the state police and failed the first exam. It was an interesting kind of an exam. But I failed it, but then you could retake it a month later. I was in the state police 25 and a half years.
Oh, my goodness. Okay.
Yeah, I'm retired from the state police.
By the way, that's very
When the Lord breathes his wrath on the bosom of the waters, when the rollers are a-pounding up and down along the shore, when the mariners are thinking of his wife and sons and daughters, and the little home that he may never see anymore, when the bars are white and yeasty and the shoals are all a-frothing, and the wild nor'easter's cutting through the rigging like a knife, through the seething roar and screech, he's patrolling on the beach. He's the government's hired hand for the saving of a life.